Welcome to the Resilient Earth podcast, where we talk with speakers from the United States and around the world about the critical issues facing our planet and the positive actions people are taking, from the tiniest of actions to the grandest of gestures, so that we can continue to thrive and survive for generations to come. I'm Leanne Lindsay, producer and host, along with co-hosts and co-producers Scott and Tree Mercer of Mendonoma Whale and Seal Study, located on the South Mendocino and North Sonoma coasts. The music for this podcast is by Eric Alleman, an international composer, pianist, and writer living in the Sea Ridge. Discover more of his music, animations, ballet, stage, and film work at ericalleman.com. You can find Resilient Earth on Spotify, Apple, and Amazon podcasts, iHeartRadio, YouTube, SoundCloud, and wherever you find your podcasts. Today on Resilient Earth Radio and Podcast, we are talking with Carl Nettleton, founder and president of OpenOceans Global in San Diego. Welcome to the show, Carl.
Thank you, Leanne. Happy to be here.
And I just thought I'd let our listeners know how we met. And we had been following the UN Treaty on Plastics last year after speaking with Five Gyres founder and president Marcus Erickson. He was on one of our past episodes and had attended both Canada and South Korea meetings. And then the talks fell through at the end of the year. So we wanted to find out more about what was happening on that, if there was going to be another meeting this year. So I reached out to an email list that I have been following by the Octo Group, which is the Open Communications for the Oceans, which researchers and scientists from around the world comment on, including yourself, and you responded. So that's how we met. And today we want to find out more about you, Carl, about your organization, and if you've got an update on the UN Treaty on Plastics and what is being done about the plastics in our oceans and our world. Why don't we start with the genesis for OpenOceans Global?
Well, that goes back a little bit of a ways. It goes back to, I ran two ocean organizations in the 1980s. And one was the National Coalition for Marine Conservation. We worked a lot on fisheries conservation, and interesting plastic gill nets. The other was the San Diego Oceans Foundation, which was a group that brought everybody. San Diego's an ocean community. It brought many of the different ocean community members, whether they be fishers, conservation folks, government agencies, together to work on educational projects as a way to have everybody get to know each other and solve problems. Those were two really good formative processes that I learned about. And interesting, back in the 80s, we were doing plastic. We were working on gill net issues, which are monofilament gill nets, ghost nets.
Big issue.
And our organization put together the first coastwide analysis of marine mammal entanglement. Previous to that, the people in San Diego would see a whale washed up on the beach, entangled in a gill net, and would be reported locally. Same in Santa Barbara, but neither region knew that it was happening up and down the coast. So we put together the first database of that and started to learn how sharing information from different regions in a common database can start to create communications in a new way. And so that one more step along the way, I was a consultant on ocean issues for a while. I was pursuing the city of San Diego on some of their wastewater quality issues, and someone suggested that I work for the city of San Diego. So I worked for the wastewater department handling their public relations. Then I ended up being the public and media affairs director for the city. created a collaboration that organized a period of intense construction in downtown San Diego. There were over 100 projects on the drawing board, a number of special events. We created a map-based tool that would allow folks to see who was doing what that would impact the public and how to avoid the multiplicity of impacts. And that worked so well that it created a community of folks that worked together to make sure that you could work, play, and live in downtown San Diego despite all that activity. My head said, wait a minute, could we do that with the ocean? And that's when OpenOceans Global was founded back in 2006. Actually, our original goal was to aggregate and visualize the world's ocean data to try to bring that whole international ocean community together. It was too big of a bite. We shifted to plastic to show how we could do that with plastic and create an international community focused on how we can stop plastic from reaching the ocean.
That is no easy task, and it seems like you have quite the background that helps you in this mission. And why don't we talk a little bit more about, how extensive your background is in this area?
Well, I have done a lot of things, and we've with when we first founded OpenOceans Global, we literally went around the world. We went to Rio Plus 20. We went to the Copenhagen climate talks. We were
Wow.
hosted sessions in Abu Dhabi at the Eye on Earth meetings. Yeah, we've hosted the AGU, American Geophysical Union Ocean Town Hall, all trying to socialize this concept that data and visualization, primarily mapping, can really work to help people see the world as and issues in one way. And so, as I said, we're focusing now on on ocean plastic. I mean, along the way, part of my job was to work with government officials at the state and federal level, elected officials, local officials, and so we've learned a lot along the way about government relations. We had to do media along the way, of course, and so we hopefully our organization brings a breadth of expertise and experience to help us effectively move through what we need to do to meet our objectives and our goals.
Your organization seems to have a lot of people working with it. I was impressed when I looked at your website for Open Oceans Global. Can you tell us a little bit about some of those people?
We're very proud of our board of directors. We've got a strong working board. These are folks that we've in some cases we courted for several years, but we've known them over time. We have Dan Reifsnyder, who was the U.S. climate negotiator for the Paris 2015 treaty. We have the former president of Susan Avery of Woods Hole Oceanographic, Linda Adams, who led Governor Schwarzenegger's international climate efforts when she was the head of the California Environmental Protection Agency, and it goes on. We're quite a good board, a working board that really care about this issue and bring us the expertise and the background to help us move forward. Dan from who was like I said, the climate treaty negotiator really gave us insight and understanding the plastic treaty talks and what was important and what wasn't, and kind of help us cut through the clutter, if you will.
Did you attend some of those sessions?
We have not attended those sessions yet. We've kind of been waiting for, the first three were mostly, I guess I could say stall tactics, depending what you want to think, but they didn't make much progress. So we've been kind of waiting for the right point to come and see where we could make a difference, but I've been following it from afar.
As I understand it, we've got a guest that's going to be coming up next week that we're talking with, actually in a couple of weeks, but they're on the board of scientists that are providing data for the UN Treaty on Plastics. But from what we gather, the next session, they're trying to plan it for June. And do you know where? Is it Paris or is it London?
No, I just learned today that the extension of the fifth session, they're calling it 5.2, but in reality it's the sixth session, is going to be held in Geneva, and I just had the date, August 5th through 14th. Is the date
Really? All
is the date
right.
So that's information I just got this morning.
News update. I love it. Um,
We try
and
to be current.
yes, yes, that is great. So August again,
August 5th through August 14th in Geneva, Switzerland.
5th through 14th in Geneva in Switzerland. That's great. My co-hosts and co-producers, Scott and Tree Mercer, have been studying and watching whales most of their lives. And they've got an organization now that they watch from the shore and observe traffic along our northern Pacific coast. They used to track both coasts, but they're mostly specifically now on the West Coast, on the Pacific, and they were in a documentary by a couple of Berkeley students called Washed Ashore, of all things. And that was just, I think, 2 years ago. But the data, even from then, has been changing. And that data mapping is so critical, so important to understanding the full picture. And I want to get to that more in just a little bit. But I think what I'd like to find out first is if you could tell us some of the facts about plastics in our oceans.
Sure. I think one of the interesting things is that we have in the United States, and I hear locally, we have beach cleanups happening all the time, and it's good thing to do. But the lack of realization of how much plastic is actually on beaches around the world in certain key areas, and while the United States is one of the top producers of plastic, we export that plastic problem by, as many people know, shipping it overseas to some countries where they
That's
have
right.
waste management and it ends up in the ocean. But we also manufacture overseas in countries with poor waste management, and who knows how much less our products cost because not only because of cheaper labor and cheaper materials, but because the cost of waste management is less. It would be more if they manufactured in the U.S. And thirdly, pristine places that we love to visit. However, when they used to have little low-rise houses there, and now they have high-rise hotels, and the people and the plastic products come with it. They then end up on their beaches. So that's one of the ways. I don't want to underestimate what we do. It's a lot. But where the waste actually hits the ocean is not on our shores. It's probably less than 1% of it comes from our shores. As much as the more conservative numbers are 55% of it actually comes from 5 countries, and 70% comes from 10 countries. So
That's interesting.
that's where the plastic really reaches the ocean, and approximately 80% of that comes from rivers. So trying to understand that flow and recognizing that while there may be some cigarette butts, plastic bottles, and a lost flip-flop on our beaches, I don't want to minimize that. There's kids playing in ankle-deep plastic in beaches in other parts of the world, primarily in Southeast Asia.
I was going to ask you if you could list some of those countries that you mentioned. There were five
Yeah,
top
the
ones.
top five, depending on the list, is it's China, the Philippines, Indonesia, Malaysia, Brazil comes up in the top five or top 10, depending on the list. And it's there. China and the Philippines were primarily the largest acceptor or importer of plastic waste for recycling and disposal, but they've stopped doing it now, so it's shifting to Malaysia and some other countries.
Well, we talked about some of the facts. Let's talk about some of the myths that abound about ocean plastics.
I give a number of talks, and when I ask people where the plastic is in the ocean, they suggest that it's in an island in the middle of the Pacific that you can almost walk across. The truth is that 75% of ocean plastic is on a shoreline somewhere. Most of the rest of it's in coastal waters. And there's no real good number that I would cite, but somewhere between something less than 10% is actually out in the deep ocean. And so it kind of disempowers us to think that there's an island of garbage and plastic, because what can you do about that other than hope the ocean cleanup is going to take care of it for us? But if it's on a beach somewhere, we can find it. If we can find it, we can figure out how it got there and stop the leakages into the environment upstream and up current. And that's where our focus is.
Oh, that's good. And I want to get more into that in just a second. You did bring up ocean cleanup. What are your thoughts on what Boy and Slat is doing?
Well, it's an ambitious goal to try to clean up the ocean. I know we'd put together with a former admiral and some folks before he started doing his work. We did some analysis of doing the very same thing, and we thought it would be too tough to do because the plastic is small, it's too dispersed. I wish him the best of luck, but what I do commend him for is I commend him for the research that he's done and his organization has done, is that he has shifted a lot of his efforts to a river intervention, which is a key place. If you can stop
Right.
that plastic in a river before it gets to the ocean, then you've really done something. And we think that's where a lot of the effort should go.
True. He's done quite a bit of work, a young man who's addressed quite a bit of the plastics coming out of these rivers, but it is an even bigger issue that it can't be just boiled down to this will take care of everything. So go ahead and keep using your plastic. No, that's not going to work. So how is Open Oceans Global addressing some of these issues?
Let me finish with a couple more facts first,
Sure.
before we shift
Okay.
to that. I think the first is that there's a philosophical ideal that we can stop plastic production. That's what the environmental groups and the High Ambition Coalition of countries want to do with the plastic treaty. They want to really cut down plastic production. In the face of that, um, the projections show that it's going to double and triple in coming decades. And so the challenge is, how can you stop it when it's projected the momentum is going the other way? And when it comes to the treaty, of course, that is being blocked by some key plastic producing countries, primarily Russia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and some of the other Gulf states. And to get that into the treaty, you need everybody to agree, and they're not going to agree. So that's a real challenge. Many of the corporations want to want to really move a circular economy forward. That's admirable. We should do more recycling. That's a piece of the puzzle, but we're not going to recycle our way out of a problem where less than 10% of plastic is recycled now. So, keep working on that, but that's not going to happen soon. So what that means is plastic still keeps flowing into the ocean year in and year out. The Pew suggests it's 11 million metric tons a year in 2022. That's going to triple or nearly triple by 2040.
Yeah, so we were talking about some of the myths and some of the facts. Since part of that myth is really about that, what you just touched on, recycling. And a big lawsuit just came out against ExxonMobil because they've been misleading the public for a long time, according to the lawsuit that's been filed. And the recycling image that we see on so many products. And so they too are behind these countries that are going to prevent or want to prevent a treaty from coming together. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
They're the plastic producing countries at the treaty level, yes, are going to block any attempt to significantly reduce plastic production.
Right. And I guess my addition to that, it seems like petroleum companies are a big pressure for those countries.
Oh, sure, the economics of it. It's all about politics and economics.
So why don't we talk now about what Open Oceans Global is doing? How are you addressing some of these issues about plastics in our oceans?
Well, one of the things we've been doing is we want to understand what the issues are clearly. Our focus, I see us less as an environmental group and more as a solutions group. We're interested in understanding, and if people go to our website and look at our newsletter, The Transition, it's about people and progress in trying to address the ocean plastic issue. So every issue, we take a deeper dive on one or two issues that talk about, whether there's, about chemicals in plastic, about recycling, about why does Coca-Cola, continue to package their products in plastic bottles when they could just as easily do it in aluminum cans.
I was
What
just reading that this morning, that newsletter that you're talking about.
So if if you take a look at our website, you'll see a list of the newsletters, and the headlines of that are in each newsletter are in the clickable link on our webpage. And there's a lot of good information there. And we've spent our time every month trying to say what's an issue that we should really dive into this month and do a little bit of work on, and provide people with links to real source documents that will be accurate. So we've been doing that. We've also been trying to identify who the people are that are doing the good work around the world. So we recognize one or two experts or leaders in our newsletter. We have a photo and a bio that we ask them to approve. And it's everything from Ambassador Vyas, the chair of the plastic treaty process, to somebody working on a very admirable project in a local region of their world, part of their world. And these are the people we look for, people with good hearts. These are the people that we think are really making a difference in a way that people should know about. So it's who are the people? What's the facts and what's the information? We've been, if you looked at our ocean plastic trash map, we've been trying to identify places around the world where there's significant plastic on beaches on a regular basis, and we have a picture of where those. You can go on the map, you can click on the icon, and a picture comes up with a little bit of background on what that's all about.
I'm glad you brought that up, because that is an incredible resource for people to see the big picture. And how did you compile all that data?
Well, it's day after day. Some of it, a little bit was done by citizen science, but it's just been online research, trying to find images on the web, and reading reports, and seeing people talking about a beach here, an island there, and just trying to compile, just like we did with the whale. With the whales entangled in nets along the coast, we're trying to find out where the beaches and other areas are significantly fouled by plastic, and so we can start to get our arms around that. One of the interesting things about plastic is it's an international problem, but it's an international problem because of all the local places that are impacted. And if you think about it, as 75% of all ocean plastic is on a beach somewhere, or on a coastline. That's a local issue that the locals have to deal with. It's the accumulation of all of those local issues that make it an international problem. And so that's, again, going back to how do we put data together? How do we get people to see that they're not alone in this, and that people all around the world are doing the same thing, and get them to share solutions in an effective way. So that's where we're aiming.
Yes, I was just looking again at your website, OpenOceans.org, and there is a whole list of solutions people are doing around the world towards reducing plastic pollution. And some of them come from local communities. And I think there was one that was, well, I know India is doing one approach called refillable, and they're taking your existing containers and they drive by your homes with all the different products that you can refill. But there is, where was it? A Sungai Watch?
Sungai Watch is, we think they're kind of our heroes in a way, because they understand and have done what we think needs to be done all around the world. These are three siblings in Bali surfing in plastic, and they hated it. So they started to do beach cleanups in Bali, and they started to realize that the plastic was coming from the rivers. So they formed Sungai Watch, and now they've got, they're in 100 rivers. I think they've got almost 100, I forget the number, 100 employees that are actually cleaning those rivers on a regular basis. But they didn't stop there. They said, how's it getting into the rivers? And they recognized, and kind of, it seems hard to believe in the United States, but in Indonesia, there's many canals running down to the streams that run by people's houses. They literally don't have any trash collection systems. They literally throw plastic out of their kitchen window into the canal that goes and ends up in the river, or even worse, they go to their bridge and dump it on the bridge into the river. So now they're doing training programs in the villages to say, look, you can
Oh,
fish and swim in your river again, but here's what you have to do that.
right.
And so and then they're taking the plastic they collect the part that can be recycled and reused, and they're making high-end furniture out of it that will be sold to folks that can afford that kind of thing to help fund some of their efforts. But I think that's that mechanism of looking upstream and looking up current and say, where did that plastic come from? How do we stop it from getting to the ocean? Then how do we stop it from getting into the river? Then how do we stop it from getting into the environment at all? And it's that new kind of thinking to do that instead of thinking, well, we've got to there's things Coca-Cola can do clearly. I mean, as I already said, I don't know why they don't use aluminum cans. Willing to take
Right.
they're willing to take the PR hit of being one of the worst polluters of plastic in the world, and instead of switching to aluminum cans, and they already have that supply chain. So yes, it would probably cost a little bit more money, but for what it would accomplish, it's amazing. But anyway, the Sungai Watch folks are really I really admire them.
I just wonder about the Coca-Cola thing. Do you think tariffs on the aluminum could be influencing their decision?
Um, Actually, in our most recent newsletter, it seems like they switch the article that we read about in Plastics News, which is a really well done publication, says that they can switch back and forth between plastic and aluminum at will, and they'll probably just switch to local U.S. aluminum providers.
I like that if it happens. Let's go back to the solutions list again, because there are also some manufacturers who are coming up with better solutions. And one of them, I don't know quite how to pronounce it, but it starts out like it's not plastics, but it's not pla.
Yeah, Nopla, nope, Nopla. Yeah, yeah.
Ha. Tell us
They've
a little bit about that one.
Yeah, they've got a seaweed based product that is ostensibly biodegradable that they can make packaging materials from. So yeah, they've won a number of awards.
And they're out of the UK and they're doing a number of things, like even just the to-go boxes from restaurants.
Right.
They've come up with a great solution for that, and also other things like these little pods that you throw into your washer or your dishwasher, and then also with drinks for sport drinks. There's something that they have that addresses that issue too. So I think these are novel and innovative approaches to the major problem of the source of all the plastics. I
There's a
mean,
lot of good thinking out there and trying to do things. Yeah, I think one of the hard things is to differentiate between what I call a science project and what's something that actually can be scalable and can be put into practice. Science,
scalable, right.
science projects are those kinds of things where, there's been a number of them that we've figured out how to make bacteria eat plastic. And okay, well, that's good enough, but where are they going to eat that plastic? Are you going to dump it in the rivers? You're going to dump it in how are you going to get them to eat the plastic? And it's, how is that actually going to operate? And I just read an article this morning about microplastics that the bacteria in the ocean eat. If they eat one kind, it stays in the same form when when the bacteria discharge it out. But another kind, it breaks down into smaller nanoparticles that are even worse. So
Yeah,
it's really trying to differentiate between can that really work and how can it work versus something that good science. Don't object to the science, but how is it really going to be implemented?
I'm sure you've heard of what's happening out of Japan with the Riken Center.
Which one is that? Excuse me.
They're the ones that came up with a biodegradable plastic-like material that's able to fully break down in seawater.
Yeah, that just
And
came out in the last week, I think. Yeah.
yeah, right around the end of last year too, right around the UN treaty when it didn't continue, when it
Hmm.
stalled. But the new plastics are created by combining two ionic monomers, and that form cross-linked salt bridges. And that provides strength and flexibility, but they also found that in both soil and water, in soil, the sheets of the new plastic degraded completely over the course of 10 days. And in the meantime, when it dissolved and it dispersed into the soil, phosphorus and nitrogen similar to fertilizer.
Yeah.
So I don't know how scalable it is. I don't know how sustainable, but it sounds like it's a possible solution in the manufacturing
Yeah,
process.
it's interesting. I think the breakdown part, there's a plus and minus to the breakdown part, just as we just talked about the bacteria that are eating plastic, what happens after it breaks down?
Right.
Because it breaks down in the ocean, is what's in the ocean, is that a good thing? Well, maybe it is. And then, I love that it broke down in 10 days in soil because a number of the products that list themselves as compostable, they're compostable, but only under completely different. You can't put them in regular compost. They have to be in certain high heat conditions that don't exist in our current waste management system. So
Uh,
just because it says compostable doesn't mean you can throw it in the garden, right?
that is very true. And I want to go back to your website again because this is a great resource for a lot of people to take a look at a lot of the solutions that are happening around the world. I mean, one of the reasons we started doing this podcast alone last September is to try to find some of the positive things that people are doing to address some of the critical issues that are facing us today. I mean, we tend to get a little bit overwhelmed, and a lot of us just want to shut down. And then we hear about, oh, look at what these people are doing and what these people are doing. And it begins to lift you up and you begin to think, oh, well, maybe I could participate in a small way. And that's why we wanted to bring podcast episodes together that is shared on radio as well, that helps people hear about these positive things. And on your website solutions list, it's quite long. And it's you've been gathering a lot of information from around the world as well as getting and I wanted to offer this too in the solutions category for everyone to think about. You've opened up your data mapping to citizen scientists. They can actually participate and share information with you, just like people that do whale watching do with Happy Whale. They contribute information to help the data get more completed. So I wanted you to talk a little bit about how citizen scientists could get involved and maybe some of the other solutions there too.
Yeah, thank you. We do have our ocean plastic map does have a number of places around the world that have been fouled by plastic, but we do have also a link to a map-based form where you can put a dot on a map and say, here's this is beach X here. It's all fouled by plastic. You can upload a picture and or put a link to a picture in there so you can show us what it looks like. Then there's a couple simple questions you can ask that will allow us to better understand what's going on that beach. And that when you put that in, it automatically uploads to our map as a little red dot. And then when we see a new little red dots come in, we check them out and make sure they're verifiable and do a little research on them and say thank you.
I think that's fantastic. We know a few citizen scientists just here in our little local community of Mendocino County and Sonoma counties on the North Coast that are tracking what's happening in the ocean to whales and seals like my co-hosts and co-producers are doing, and who provide that data to other organizations like NOAA and other um, organizations that are helping to address everything from climate to plastics. And right now, our focus today is really a little bit more on plastics because that has become such a big issue. And it is a top issue for a number of reasons because it affects the marine mammals in the oceans. one of the things I've seen on that Octo group mail list is information about how it is affecting the seals and all the marine life in the oceans, what they're finding when they do these examinations of these sea creatures, and how much there is, inside of these marine mammals. Uh, can you talk a little bit about that right now, about the data that you found, how it's affecting the marine life, and then what other data you may have on how large a picture this is?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of myths there that to clear up that too. There's
Good.
clearly significant impacts on marine life that mistake plastic of various sorts for a food source, or they get entangled in it. Um, but some of the images that we've used to illustrate that are, I think, probably less than perfect. I think there's one you've probably seen of the seahorse with a Q-tip in its tail. Pretty
Yeah.
common. Seen that. Well, that's probably the only seahorse in the world that has had a Q-tip on its tail. It does okay for awareness. And then there's a sea turtle that has a straw in its nose. Now, I don't know how that
Yes.
turtle got that straw in its nose, but I doubt there are many, and that he may be the only one. And it's, tragic that it happened to him. At least he was able to be saved. But the real problems are, you see the albatrosses on Midway Island that have died and that have multiple kinds of plastic in their stomachs
Intestines, right, and stomach.
when they open them up,
Yeah.
and there are indications that whales that are filter feeder kind of whales that open up and bring it in. So there's clearly an impact of some importance to marine life. I mean, even back in the 1980s, when we were first working on this kind of thing, that there were seagulls with six-pack rings on their heads, and line monofilament nets on the necks of seals, and the irony about this, Leanne, is that this was in the 1980s, mid 1980s. We were saying reduce, recycle, you know,
I remember.
and it was we didn't make that message up. That was a consistently understood message in the 1980s, and it hasn't gotten us anywhere. Yes, we should still recycle. Yes, we should reduce our use, but yes, we should reuse where possible. But the amount of plastic produced, the waste, and what's going into the ocean has continued to increase year on year.
Can you tell us what some of those numbers are about plastics in the oceans right now?
Yeah, I don't have the number on the top of my head for how much is in there, but it's from plastic flows are expected to triple from 11, or nearly triple from 11 million tons to 29 million tons by 2040. The interesting one is that there's already 109 million metric tons of plastic in rivers and lakes right now, that even if we could stop all plastic production today, it's still going to be flowing down to the ocean for years to come. And global plastic production is estimated to increase from 449 million metric tons in 2020 to 1.23 billion metric tons by 2060. So you see these numbers are just huge. The amount of plastic waste generated worldwide is expected to triple by 2060. I mean, those are some of the numbers, and they kind of make you lose hope if you think of it.
Yes, it
But
does.
but to really solve it, we have to understand where it's impacting us, where it's impacting people. It's another whole issue with human health that we're finding about chemicals and plastic. There's, fourth last time I looked, 4,000 plus different kinds of chemicals found in plastic, or 16,000, and 4,000 of them are known to be hazardous. Which of those are hazardous? What should we really be doing about that? I think the science is still emerging on that. There was a kind of another interesting story, and maybe you saw it, about the black plastic used to make spatulas and other kind of kitchenware.
Yes.
The story came out. And it caused a number of people I knew calling and say, "Hey, we're getting rid of our plastic spatulas now." But then it turned out that a week later, the analysis of the data is that the original researchers had made a mistake by a factor of 100, I think, and so that what was really on the edge of being harmful to harmful to humans was really 100 times less. And there's that kind of story that
There's
gets out that
that
gets out there
problem.
about
Right.
research and everybody says, "Oh, no more I'm sure black plastic spatulas took a hit for better or for worse, or but the facts weren't true as they came out. And the
And
same thing happened with the original research on plastic in rivers. There was a study that estimated that 10 rivers produced 90% of, or carried 90% of the world's plastic to the ocean. But what they had failed to do in that study was recognize that there are dams on a lot of those rivers. So the algorithm they used to estimate it didn't account for the fact that a lot of upstream flows never made it to the ocean.
you also brought up something that when you talk about the data being either misread or misinterpreted, people have a hard enough time, it seems like these days, even believing science at all. So that doesn't help when we're trying to use science to show what's happening and what maybe some of the solutions might be. So that's an issue when that does happen. Also, another thing that occurred to me when you were talking about the amount of plastics in our body, the other thing that we've heard is the amount could be like a credit card in our brain of plastic. I don't know if you've heard that one, but that's not very comforting to think about the type of plastics that might be in our bodies. And then a third thing that occurred to me too, the use of plastics too in the creation of our residential buildings, our commercial buildings, the amount that's used throughout a community. And when there's a fire like the LA fires, that's so combustible. And then that you were talking about, the ingredients in plastic. Well, that gets into the air. So if there's anything I just said that you want to respond to, I would appreciate it.
Well, the LA fires really made that case, and here you've got all these homes, and the article I read talked about the polyester cover of your sofa. The foam is plastic,
Right?
the cover is plastic. Maybe it's got a wooden frame, but maybe the glue for that frame, if it's composite wood, is made from a polymer based glue. And then they kind of went on through the whole house. The vinyl floors are plastic. If
Oh,
you
right.
if you got vinyl floor, and so when a house used to burn, it used to be wood and cotton, and in the old days, and now it's a high intensity fire fueled by plastic. And
I
so
have to say, I myself chose, instead of putting down wood floors, I put in vinyl looking or wood looking vinyl floors. That's what a lot of people do to save on cost.
yeah,
And that's
yeah, and
just
they're
one thing.
Yep, and they're well advertised as something to really not only save on cost, but they're easier to maintain and all of that stuff. So they're a good marketing campaign around it, and um, there are standards for what kind of volatile aerosols go into the from those floors, but yeah, you have to wonder. So it's
And then there's also 3D printing that has become so big these days. And they talk about all these buildings that you can print from plastics.
I haven't seen buildings from plastic. Maybe you have. I've seen 3D printing concrete buildings from.
Ah, okay. Well, I had seen some that were out of plastics type materials, but
I did
concrete
I
would
did see
be
one the other
different.
day for the first time where it was foam plastic, that
Yep.
foam that had they're kind of foam pillars, or not really pillars, but they poured the concrete in between the pillars, but the exterior and interior were foam.
Uh-huh. Well, it seems like there's so much that needs to be addressed, and it seems like a problem that is indefatigable. It cannot be fixed. But we want to talk again about what your organization is doing and how can some of these things be addressed.
Well, uh, our focus is to try to keep it simple and understandable. When as I think I mentioned, when you realize that there are only there are only three. There's only three ways plastic can end up on your beach. Uh, One is its local litter, just somebody just dropping stuff on the beach or blowing on the road from the adjacent road or the adjacent parking lot. That's one. The second is fishing gear, our ropes and nets and buoys washing up on your beach. Well, that's a pretty good indication that is coming from offshore fishing. And then the third is rivers and water flows, storm drains, and really water sources. So you can start to, if you're not having fishing gear, you've eliminated one. So then you ask yourself, is this from people just using the beach yesterday? And if that's true, and that's where the problem is you've got enforcement, regulations, education. Maybe it's more trash cans and better more trash pickup. I don't want to oversimplify it, but once you know the source, you can start to say, well, what can I do about it? And if is it coming out of a storm drains? Well, one of the key things that we've done, and we haven't released it publicly yet, but so we've developed a prototype toolkit and predictive model so that people can literally go upstream on a visual map from their beach and try to figure out where that plastic might have come from. Is it a manufacturing company that doesn't have their big dumpsters filled regularly, picked up regularly, so they fall off? Is it from a place where people gather a lot and it ends up washing into the storm drain and down to the beach? Or is it from a river? We have tools that say, is it coming, if your flow is flowing north to south and the river's to the south, it didn't come from that river because the flows would take it the other way. But if it's flowing from north to south and there's a river upstream in the north, maybe the plastic came from that river. So the idea is to say, we're standing on our beach. Let's
Yep.
figure out, go upstream and up current, like the Sungai Watch people did, and say,
Yeah.
where did this come from? And let's one step by step go upstream and up current and say, where's the next source that we can stop it? Can we use one of the ocean cleanup river intervention tools? One of the smaller, is it a smaller river? You can use a smaller river intervention boom. Where can you do it? And then keep working upstream until you get to the source and you don't need those booms anymore.
I like this idea a lot. This is a toolkit that OpenOceans has
We
on.
have we have built it, and we're doing some refinements to it now with some of our partners, and we're going to be prototyping it in a country in Latin America here in the near future, and hopefully it'll be something that can be used around the world and help all those little red dots on our map. We hope we
Yes.
be able to use this tool and start to say, this is where our plastic came from.
This is exactly what I was thinking of. I was thinking of your map with all those red dots and people having an actual kit that could help them analyze this data to figure out, okay, we found this, where did it come from? And that reminded me of what Marcus Erickson of Five Gyres had mentioned when he took a trip down the Mississippi. And he was trying to get some of the organizations to take better care of where their products ended up, but they didn't feel like they were the source. So he figured out that he actually had to track back where did all these plastics come from? Who's the organization? And this is a tool that you have created in the process of testing that I think could actually one day be of a real benefit in gathering that data. And go ahead.
I was going to say we think so, and again, it's much of the data. I know Marcus has done some of this work too, and much of the data has been, and it's been valuable data, has been to see what's the brand, what product is this plastic from, and that's been valuable data. It's really helped us identify who the corporations are. But one of the outcomes from that is we ask people, where do you think this plastic came from? We want them
Right.
to say, well, it came from that river, or it came from, and they say it came from Coca-Cola. So it came from Philip Morris, or it came from some other
Right.
and no, we're talking, how did it get there? And that's a different question
A little different question. Yes,
a little different
definitely.
question. So
Tell us about how you do that data mapping, the role that mapping plays. I think we've just been covering what that role could be.
Yeah, I think you were talking about probably some of the work I've done, not only in oceans but in other areas where you use facilitated mapping, which in a sense this is, where we try to map the different perspectives of a community or of a problem so that everybody's role in that is visual, can be visualized on the map, and then they can see how the part that they play in it, and it allows for problem solving. That's really the basis of it.
So it is the beginning of March 2025, and OpenOceans Global is your nonprofit organization. Where do you see things heading going forward this year and maybe for the next 5 years? And what part are your organization going to play?
Well, a couple of things. I think the plastic treaty is not going to end up with what the environmental community and the high ambition countries want. I think there may be, um, I think there may be some guidelines that come out of it on how to better design plastic products so they're more recyclable, and I think some of that will happen. I think there will be probably in the treaty recognition that chemicals of concern are some problem that need to have further exploration, and there may be some consensus on that. There may be something of a token nature about plastic production, but it's more likely to be an analysis rather than any kind of a cut on plastic production. I just don't see that happening given the powers to be that are going to would be impacted by that. I think there will be continue to be things like in certain places, like California has what SB 54, legislation that's going to reduce some of the single-use plastics, and that's good for California. Um, but it's not going to help much in the Philippines or Vietnam, where they may not have that legislation yet, or
That's
even if they
true.
have it in some places, they don't have the enforcement to stop it. I mean, there's been some developing countries that have passed some pretty significant legislation banning plastic bags and those kinds of things, but do they have the enforcement to stop it? Um, I think it's going to be slow. I think one of the things we didn't talk about is how poor recycling is in the United States. I mean, Norway has probably the best recycled plastic and aluminum recycling processes in the world. They the government has a tax on on plastic containers and aluminum containers. It's a bottle bill, not unusual. We have it in California and other states. 10 states
Yes.
have it. But they've also done two other things. One is that they've got the bottle bill, then they have a tax on how much is recycled, and then so the corporations fund a nonprofit that guides them on how to design their products so that they can maximize recycling. So consumers get their money back from their bottle bill. The designs are better because of the nonprofit. And when the recycling rate reaches 95%, there's no tax on the corporations for that production of that product. And as a result, Norway recycles 95% of its plastic PET bottles. And
95%.
95%. And we've heard, although somebody has disputed this, that even India even recycles over 90% of its PET bottles, the plastic bottles that come in water and Cokes and stuff like that. Completely different way. They have a trash picker society, that culture that goes into the landfills and literally picks out those bottles, gives them to a broker, and the broker takes them to a recycler. And it's lucrative enough that they achieve a 90% recycling rate, according to at least some sources. So, but you look at many of the states in the United States, here, so we know that PET bottles are the most highly recyclable plastic of all. And there are many states that recycle less than 5%. And so you ask yourself, how can that be? In some of the states in the South, I know people have told me they have to drive 40 miles to their first potential recycling location. So there isn't recycling pickup. There's not, and it seems like we do a heck of a lot better job in the United States of just doing, it doesn't harm the plastic industry. It doesn't harm the fossil fuel industry. We just have a management system to take care of our plastics. I mean, that's the recycling's the bad news. The good news is that we do have pretty good waste management in the United States. So, that's one place where we excel.
I like the, I keep mentioning Marcus, but one other thing that he brought up in was a country, Germany. He said that in Germany, and I haven't looked into this, but that you could go to these stores and just leave all the packaging there, and the store would uh, have the manufacturers pick it up and recycle it from there. So you could go into a Trader Joe's, and before you leave, you take off all the packaging, and it's handled for you right there. I
Yeah,
don't know if
Norway
that,
does Norway has a machine, a company that builds a machine, and you just put your bottles in the machine, and I think you get a credit or money back out. So it's right and right in it's right in the storefront.
so this is something that could be implemented here in the United States too, you would think.
Yeah, yeah, it's and then that seems to me something that the plastic producers and the corporations that use plastic products could really get behind, and if they wanted to at least improve that part of it. But I haven't seen a real movement for that. It seems like something they could take charge of and have good benefit for themselves.
And I
So
know there are a lot of stores, that offer the bulk bins that you can take your own containers in and refill them. I don't know how reasonable or feasible that's going to be for a lot of people to actually remember to bring those containers in, but a lot of people are doing that. They can refill their rice or their flour or their detergent right there at the store. And I brought up the example earlier from your solutions link on the OpenOceans website that was really interesting in that India actually has a vehicle that drives around and helps to bring these products to people's doors. Now, I don't know what the impact would be on that vehicle unless it's, electric or hybrid or something, but there are solutions. So, do you think that's something that's feasible too, for people to try to do?
I think it'll play a role. I think there are refillables. There's a grocery store here in San Diego, a small chain called Jimbo's that has a refillable section. There's kind of some boutique stores that are trying to get started that offer refillables of, soap and shampoo and, those kinds of things. I think it has some merit and it has some possibilities. Um, you have to ask yourself, is the consumer going to actually carry those to the store and do that? And if, yes, maybe three or four, but, maybe there's a special basket container that can hold 12 and, you can do all kinds of products in it. But it's, again, something that's, I'm glad people are pursuing it. And they're doing it with, they're doing it not only in India. I'm trying to remember, I think it's in Argentina. There's a company that's doing it. There's some other places that are having the mobile ones that go around, which I think is more feasible than taking the bottles to the store. But
Oh, another good idea would be is if you could just, whoever wanted to, they could bring in their containers and contribute it to this one area where it gets recycled, cleaned, and then they offer you a choice of your own containers, and then you could fill them right there. Then you wouldn't have to remember to bring your own containers in. It's hard enough for me to remember to bring my bags into the store, but
well, you want to really go back in history. I mean, you think about way back in the 50s and even the 60s. I remember I had a job in the 60s in a grocery store, and one of my jobs was to people would bring back their glass bottles. That's how you got a Coke, or that's how you got Pepsi and Seven Up.
that's
And I had to
right.
organize them into wooden crates so that when the Seven Up guy came, he could take his bottles back. And that's just the way it was done. There weren't aluminum cans, there weren't plastic bottles, and they took them back to the
That's right.
so we did all this without some of these containers in the past, and even there was a transition then to aluminum, and then aluminum pop tops didn't used to stay on the can; they used to come off. So they would end up in the beach and on the street, and people walking barefoot in the summer would cut their feet. So then they created a pop top that stayed on the can. And in
Right.
Europe, I haven't seen it here yet that I can recall, but we were in London last fall, and all the bottles there, they're required to keep the plastic cap on top of the bottle. It's got a little, you unscrew it, but then it holds, it stays on the bottle. It doesn't go away.
Oh, I like that.
And it varies from place to place, but pretty consistently, cigarette butts and plastic bottles,
Yes.
top, and sometimes, more than half of the plastic collected of the top 10 anyway, are those items. So,
That's what the California Coastal Cleanup fellow was telling us about too.
yeah,
Cigarette butts,
yep,
plastic caps from bottles.
yes.
Uh, yeah, the one
That was
thing I
Evan,
want,
right? Yeah, Evan.
yes,
Yeah, yeah.
and there's one thing I wanted to talk about too is that it just occurred to me, the scare that we had over Tylenol back in the day.
Mm,
See, it started this whole, adding extra levels of security on all the bottles and then extra plastic wrap around that. So there's that issue of, people not wanting products tampered with. So there's extra
right.
levels of plastic.
Well, and there's also, I know in the grocery store now, if you'll recall, for a long time until not too long ago, we used to get eggs in a sort of a cardboard kind of carton, right?
Yeah.
And now I know in some of the grocery stores I've seen they're in plastic
Plastic.
containers. I get it. They're sealable. They don't, you can drop them and the eggs don't break and they don't get wet and fall apart. But they proudly label them as recycled plastic. And I said, yeah, but you didn't have any plastic at all before. So
Exactly.
so
And
yes, you can make an argument for it and say, oh, it's recycled plastic, but I think we were probably better off the other way.
well, Carl, we're coming to the end of our hour here, and I want to thank you very much for coming on today to talk with us here at Resilient Earth Radio and podcast. And if you would give us an idea of maybe some of the other things that you're involved with as well outside of Open Oceans Global.
Well, one of the things I do is I've had a little hiatus the last 2 months, but I have a publication on Substack called the Net Report, in which I try to, in a very factual way, kind of address what's going on in climate, the future of work and the economy, the political divide, and health. And it's a little eclectic. We try to have fun with it too, but it's the idea is to take things that you might not see on the headlines of the news and the newspaper that come across our desk and try to add some depth and insight to what's going on in what we call a changing world. That's one of the things, and it's OpenOceans is a passion of the heart for me. I've also got a consulting firm, and we work helping organizations think through tough questions that they're dealing with. So we've had that for a long time, and it's been good, interesting work.
Especially in today's political environment with the layoffs and the budget cuts. And it seems quite a bit of chaos right now, and people are struggling to try to find their footing.
Yes, yes, and it's having an impact on plastic work too. There's a collaboration of the State Department and the Ocean Conservancy, the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, um, called EPIC. And I'm trying to remember exactly what the acronym for is, but they came together to do some work around the world around plastic, and that primary source of funding was the State Department. So that's been frozen right now. So those organizations are having to struggle with that and figure out what their next steps are. So it's a challenging time for sure.
Very challenging time. And if someone wants to reach out to you, how would they do that?
For OpenOceans, they can go to info at openoceans.org. It's probably the best way to do it. And my consulting firm is Net Strategies. Info at Net Strategies, NETT strategies.com.
Well, I'm glad we got connected through the Octo group. Thank you for joining us today, Carl.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for reaching out. It was a delightful hour with you. Thanks, Leanne.
You're welcome. Thanks for listening to the Resilient Earth podcast, where we talk about critical issues and positive actions for our planet. Resilient Earth is produced by Planet Centric Media, a 501c3 nonprofit, and Seastorm Studios, Inc., located on the rugged North Sonoma coast of Northern California. I'm Leanne Lindsay, producer and host, along with co-hosts and co-producers Scott and Tree Mercer of Mendonoma Whale and Seal Study, located on the South Mendocino and North Sonoma coasts. The music for this podcast is by Eric Alleman, an international composer, pianist, and writer living in the Sea Ridge. Discover more of his music, animations, ballet, stage, and film work at ericalleman.com. You can find Resilient Earth on Spotify, Apple, and Amazon podcasts, iHeartRadio, YouTube, SoundCloud, and wherever you find your podcasts. Please support us by subscribing or donating to our cause.